Glory to Ukraine. Hello, dear friends. My name is Vladlen Mariev, and you are on the History Without Myths channel, where we talk about the past of Ukraine and the world without embellishment or falsification. Subscribe to History Without Myths and click on the bell to not miss our new issues. Let Ukrainian YouTube flourish. 90 years ago, on January 30, 1933, Adolf Hitler became Reich Chancellor of Germany. This event was neither the result of an armed coup, as in the history of the Russian Bolsheviks, nor the result of a vote in parliament. But the result of Hitler's becoming Reich Chancellor was the gradual establishment of the Nazi dictatorship, totalitarian dictatorship, and unlimited power of the Führer in Germany over the course of a year and a half, from January 1933 to August 1934. How did Germany go from the democratic Weimar Republic to the totalitarian Third Reich? What ideas did Hitler promote in his programmatic works, Mein Kampf and The Second Book? What was the program of his party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP for short? We will discuss this in today's issue. And at the end of the stream, I will traditionally answer your questions via chat. So, dear friends, I ask you to write your questions towards the end of the video. German Nazism, like the Bolshevik dictatorship or Italian fascism, was a direct outgrowth of the First World War. In the case of Germany, it was a product of the immediate results of the war. Of course, the long-awaited peace, especially after such a long event as the World War, which lasted 4 years and 4 months, is a joyful event, peace. However, for the Germans in 1918, peace brought a very grim reality. The First World War ended on November 11 with the signing of the Armistice of Campaign in Marshal Foch's staff car. Germany, the last of all the Central Powers, recognized its defeat, as Bulgaria, then the Ottoman Empire, and finally Austria-Hungary were forced to sign an armistice. At the same time, Austria-Hungary split into several states, and a revolution broke out in Germany. And the revolution led to the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II and his forced flight to the neutral Netherlands. After that, Germany ceased to be a monarchy forever. Exhausted by a long and very difficult war, this country suffered great human losses. More than 2 million dead and more than 4,200,000 wounded. These are only military losses, because tens or even hundreds of thousands of civilians died of exhaustion and starvation, especially in the last 2 years of the war. It should be added that at the end of the war, Germany, like the rest of Europe, was hit by a Spanish flu pandemic. The pandemic will last until the early 1920s, and several million people will die from it. The official end of the war for Germany was the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919. The terms of the treaty were so unfavorable that German diplomats refused to sign the document until the Entente representatives issued an ultimatum, threatening to resume hostilities. Thus, according to this treaty, Germany lost 13% of its pre-war territory to neighboring countries. First of all, these were France, Belgium, Denmark, Poland, Lithuania, and Czechoslovakia. All the colonies that Germany had had before the outbreak of World War I passed into the hands of the victors, Great Britain and France. Belgium, Portugal, Japan. Germany has lost very economically powerful regions, Alsace and Lorraine, as well as Upper Silesia, which account for a significant share of coal and iron ore production. Only a token armed force remained in the country, especially compared to the Kaiser's army, which at one time was the strongest continental army in Europe and had enormous authority in German society. The size of the armed forces, called the Reichswehr, was limited to 100,000 soldiers. In addition, they were forbidden to have airplanes, tanks, and submarines, and the surface fleet was significantly reduced. Fortifications on Germany's western borders were to be demolished. In addition, huge reparations were imposed on the country, the final amount of which was not initially determined, and they severely undermined the economy, which was already depleted by the war. In addition, the Treaty of Versailles placed the primary responsibility for the outbreak of war on Germany, although I would remind you that Austria-Hungary actually started the war by attacking Serbia on July 28, 1914. And the perpetrators of the war were in fact all the great countries of that time, which organized a real pursuit and struggle for a new division of the world. And they planned to hold a show trial of the former Kaiser Wilhelm. But the Netherlands refused to extradite him, the trial did not take place, and the former Kaiser Wilhelm lived in this country until the end of his days in 1941. The political activist Otto Strasser described the situation in Germany after the end of World War I in this way.
Germany lost the war, but that's not all. People were starving, and the countries of Central Europe were literally strangled by the blockade. 120 million German marks were invested in military loans. The middle class was destroyed, small rentiers went bankrupt, insurance companies stopped all payments, men and women who had been saving for a normal existence in old age lost their savings and died in absolute poverty. War veterans did not receive pensions. This state of affairs was not a consequence of the difficult Treaty of Versailles, as one might assume, but a direct result of the war, which completely destroyed the country's economic life.
It goes without saying that in the post-war years, millions of Germans found themselves in despair and a prolonged depression. This has created a very favorable environment for various revanchist forces that will promise their fellow citizens to restore justice and regain Germany's lost greatness. And one of these political forces was the National Socialist Party, which was headed by Adolf Hitler in 1931. But first, it is worth analyzing what the so-called Weimar Republic, i.e. Germany after the First World War and before the Nazi dictatorship, was like. Why the Weimar Republic? This is how Germany was conventionally called from the end of 1918 to the beginning of 1933. It was an intermediate stage of history between monarchy and dictatorship, when the country was trying to build a democratic system. The Weimar state is so called because it was formed at the Constituent Assembly of Germany in 1919 in the city of Weimar, which is located in Thuringia, in fact, in the center of the country. In Ukraine, this city is often called Vejmar, although the German name of the city sounds like Vajmar. In fact, the name, Weimar Republic, did not officially exist. And during the times of the Empire, and during the times of the Republic, and even during the times of the Hitler dictatorship, the country was officially called Deutsches Reich. What does German state mean? But in the last years of Nazism, the name Großdeutsches Reich, that is, Great German State, was more often used. The Weimar Republic was a mixed federal state with a strong bicameral parliament and a president who appointed the chancellor, i.e. the head of government, and the government itself was accountable to the parliament rather than the president. Over the 14 years of this republic's existence, 12 chancellors and 21 members of the government have changed, which is a very unstable situation. The situation is very similar to the governmental mess in Italy. The Weimar Republic was established in 1919 by a coalition of three center and center-left political parties. These were the Social Democrats, the Left Liberals, and the Catholics, or the so-called Party of the Center. However, they soon lost the majority of their parliaments. And centrist forces have always felt strong pressure, both from the communists on the left and from the conservatives and national socialists on the right, as well as from monarchists and supporters of Prussian militarism. At the same time, the right and left forces, which could not agree with each other, usually had a majority in parliament. And the centrist forces that were supposed to become the foundation and basis of this republic were in the minority. As a result, the Weimar Republic was constantly rocked like a ship in a storm, and it was only a matter of time before it would end up where it was. Will it roll over to the right side or to the left? The Nazi beer putsch organized in Munich in 1933 was only one of many attempts to overthrow the current regime. The next putsch was more dangerous than the Nazi uprising in Munich. The so-called Kapp-Luttwitz putsch, the two generals Kapp and Luttwitz. Or it is also called the Kappa Rebellion, which took place in March of 1920 in Berlin. The mutiny was organized by the military, which wanted a dictatorship, but only a massive strike by German workers could stop the coup. More than 12 million workers stopped working during the strike, which is considered the largest in German history. It completely paralyzed the country, resulting in the failure of the Kappa-Luttwitz putsch, and its organizers were forced to flee the country. The situation of the Weimar Republic stabilized only for a short period from 1924 to 1929. First, at that time Germany began to receive large foreign loans. And secondly, the issue of reparations was finally resolved and a general economic recovery began. You remember, for example, in the United States, it was a time of economic prosperity, i.e., a general increase in living standards, and it seemed that happy times had finally arrived. Or the happy, peaceful times of the world's development. But the stock market crash that occurred in the fall of 1929 in the United States hit Europe hard, and Germany was the hardest hit. This destroyed all the achievements of short-term stabilization. Germany again found itself in an economic crisis, which led to a political crisis, and eventually it all culminated in the establishment of the Nazi dictatorship. At the same time, the country's president since 1925 was a representative of conservative monarchist forces, Paul von Hindenburg. Former chief of the General Staff of the German Empire, former commander-in-chief of German troops on the Eastern Front, i.e. against Russia. He had a high reputation in society, but he was a very old man. At the beginning of Hindenburg's reign he was 77 years old. And at the time of completion, he was 86. By the way, this is the only president in German history who was elected in national elections, not by voting in parliament or in the Constituent Assembly. Despite his advanced age, in 1932 he was re-elected for a second term, and it was Hindenburg who appointed Adolf Hitler as chancellor. Hitler's biography is generally very well known, and this is a huge topic that we can later consider in a separate special issue devoted to the figure of Hitler. But since Nazism, as an ideology and political movement, cannot be separated from the personality of Hitler, it is now worthwhile to focus on some key episodes of his biography. The goal is to explain exactly how Hitler came to be the leader of the Nazi Party. There is a very common myth that Hitler's real name was Schicklgruber, but this is not true, as his father, whose name was Alois, had the surname Schicklgruber. However, he changed the name, Schicklgruber, to Hitler, before Adolf was born. Adolf Hitler himself was born on April 20, 1889, in the small town of Braunau am Inn, that is, Braunau on the Inn River. At that time, this river was the border between the German Empire and Austria-Hungary, and now it is the border between Austria and the Federal Republic of Germany, respectively. Accordingly, by birth Hitler was a subject of the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I of the Habsburg dynasty, but he did not consider himself a patriot of his homeland. Later, Hitler wrote that he considered his birth in this city, on the border of two empires, a very lucky symbol. Why? He said his mission was to unite all Germans into one national state. The fact is that Austrians in the late 19th and early 20th centuries mostly considered themselves Germans, saying that we were one people. And the formation of one's own, purely Austrian identity will begin actively only after World War II, after the defeat of Nazism, because then the ideas of pan-Germanism, the unification of all Germans, including Austrians, will be condemned. This would be considered, well, absolutely unacceptable. At the beginning of the 20th century, the idea of the unity of Austrians and Germans as a single people, and thus the need to create a single state, was very popular. And Hitler dreamed of eliminating this historical injustice, eliminating this state border. Especially after the Treaty of Versailles, in one of its clauses, explicitly forbade the Anschluss, the unification of Germany with Austria, so as not to strengthen Germany. From his youth, Hitler became a German nationalist, and in addition, an extreme anti-Semite. Today we will talk about his anti-Semitism in more detail. And this is a photo of Hitler from his school years. It is worth saying that he constantly regretted being born in a time of peace, when nothing worthy of serious attention seemed to be happening in the world. There were no great conquests and powerful wars of liberation to be proud of and to participate in. Indeed, after the Franco-Prussian War, which ended in 1871 with the formation of the German Empire, Western Europe did not know large-scale wars for 43 years. That is why the political figures of the time seemed to the young Hitler, as he himself wrote, to be frauds, swindlers, traitors, and just petty officials. He considered only Bismarck to be a figure worthy of respect. But Hitler did not actually see Bismarck in power because Bismarck resigned in 1890, when Hitler was only 1 year old. As a child, he avidly followed international news, especially when the war broke out. And, by the way, he later wrote that during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904–1905 he clearly took a position in support of Japan. As a subject of the Austrian Emperor, Hitler categorically did not want to serve in the Austro-Hungarian army. Why? Because they were tolerant of Slavs. According to him, there was a policy of Slavicization of the empire, for which he blamed Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was married to Sophia Hodek, a Czech by birth, most of all. As you know, this married couple was murdered together on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo, Bosnia, which caused the outbreak of World War I. In 1913, Hitler, after unsuccessful attempts to enter the Art Academy, he moved to Germany, to Munich, where he studied painting. But the Austrian authorities believed that he was evading military service. And as a result, the Austrians were able to force the Bavarian police to deport Hitler back to Austria. He was deported anyway, underwent a medical examination and was found unfit for military service for health reasons. He was then able to return to Munich just before the outbreak of World War II.